In last week's gospel, Matthew's gospel, Jesus called Peter the rock on which he would build his church. In today's gospel, he calls him Satan, and he tells him to get away from him. Peter's usually the voice of common sense in the gospel. He's the voice of the common man or woman. He's a fisherman making his living on the sea. And so when Jesus speaks of the storms of suffering and death he'll face in Jerusalem, Peter advises him to turn away. There's a storm coming, head for port. God forbid, Lord, no such thing shall ever happen to you. It's the voice of common sense. But Jesus reminds Peter, and also us along with him, that he's thinking as human beings do. Thinking as human beings do. What does that mean? Well, let's go back to the book of Genesis where human beings first began to think. You remember that after creating Adam and Eve, God puts them in a garden filled with all kinds of plants and trees. Two trees are singled out, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life. They're forbidden to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, why are they forbidden to eat from that tree? There are different interpretations. Some say that eating from that tree was deciding on moral autonomy. In other words, I know what's good and evil. I'm the only one who says what's right or wrong. Well, that's not unusual to hear claims like that today, is there? Some believe they have absolute choice over their lives. They choose what's right or wrong, good or evil, and they reject the limits of our own human condition and the finite freedom that God gives us as human beings. They're in full control. Another interpretation says that eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is a decision to trust only in human experience that we gain as we grow individually or as a people. So, like children growing up, we can distance ourselves from our parents. We begin to go on our own with the wisdom of our own. So after a while, we don't need a parent, or we don't need God. So when Peter says, and is told by Jesus that he's thinking like human beings, he's told that his thinking is too narrow. He's thinking too much like a fisherman who only knows what he's learned on the sea. In our first reading, the prophet Jeremiah is thinking that way too. He sees his life filled with disappointments. His life seems to be going nowhere, and he blames God. You have deceived me. You've let me down. You don't love me. You don't care for me. He's thinking like human beings do. In the same way with us, we often see only so far as human beings do. We have to keep asking to see things as God sees them, to expand our vision to God's vision, to embrace God's will. That's hard to do, especially when the mystery of the cross casts its shadow on us in sickness or failure or disappointment. Be my vision, O Lord. Help me to see. That's what the blind man asked God for, the physical sight that he was looking for. But we ask for a sight to see life as God does. Help me, Lord, to see as you do.